I grew up in an era that we here at the Nintendo PowerZone call the golden age of fighting games. It was during this time frame that arcades made their last stand, and damn it if they didn't put up a good fight while it lasted. The undisputed king of the fighting games was Street Fighter II and its many variations, but there were others like Midway's Mortal Kombat, Rare's Killer Instincts, and Atari's Primal Rage. In fact, fighting games can probably be attributed to the current boom of esports in general, because for many, they were the first place where true head-to-head competitions took place, and the battles were intense and the shit-talking was plenty. Ultimately, the appeal of fighting games wore off as developers released sequel after sequel with little to no innovation, and eventually the battlegrounds of the arcades became nothing more than just a faded memory for its warriors. Flash forward to 2017, and fighting games have seen a resurgence sparked by the critical and commercial success of Capcom's Street Fighter IV and Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Because of this, we have games like Pokken Tournament, Injustice, a Mortal Kombat spin-off using DC characters, and newer iterations of old classics like Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct. Welcome to the Silver Age of fighting games, but this landscape is different than the one that came before it. Lines have been drawn in the sand with both Street Fighter and Killer Instinct series locked into exclusivity on separate consoles. Nintendo, not one to miss out on a new boom, has released their own console-exclusive fighting games as well, and ARMS is the newest challenger to enter the fray. Does ARMS have what it takes to stand out among the tried and true fighting games, or is it too different? Let's start with the story. ARMS, like many fighting games before it, and many that will come after it, is severely lacking in the story department. Essentially, every fighter enters the tournament to become champion. Each has their own motivation for doing so, but for most of them, it's superficial, such as Ninjara, who enters the tournament as his senior project so he can graduate from ninja college, or Mechanica, who is a normal human who wants to compete in the tournament, so she builds herself a robot suit. And it goes on like that for each character. They don't particularly have a lot of depth or motivation, and one huge flaw of the story is that if you beat the arcade mode, or Grand Prix as they call it here, there really is no resolution to the character's individual story. We don't see Ninjara graduate from college, we are simply left with the award ceremony of receiving the champion's belt. One more thing to make note of, you don't receive the true ending of the Grand Prix until level 4 after you've beaten the true main boss Headlock. ARMS has an interesting take on story by giving each character some motivation for being in the tournament, but the lack of any resolution to these storylines is a major detraction for this category, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 6.5. Moving on to the characters. The lifeblood of all fighting games is a diverse and full character roster, and for many players, the character roster is something to celebrate or decry. Look at how people react to character reveals in Smash Bros. Or Marvel vs. Capcom, and Pokken Tournament was panned for its 16 fighter roster. ARMS undercuts Pokken with only 10 playable fighters to choose from, and while this may seem ridiculous to some, this initial 10 feels perfect and balanced. Each character is designed fantastically with their own style and flair, and each of them have their own unique abilities, such as Ninjara's teleportation, Ribbon Girl's triple jump, or Bite's robotic canine companion Bark, who will attack the opponent autonomously, which essentially amounts to a third fist for that character. It doesn't stop there. Each character can be equipped with specialized gloved, or arms as they're called here, which add to the character's overall appeal and level of customization. What's clear here is that each character was meticulously designed to appeal to a wide audience, and they have been compared to the characters of Overwatch. But something we should always keep in mind is that Nintendo has always been mindful of character design dating as far back as Mario, so it's no surprise that the fighters in ARMS are as endearing as they are. And with the promise of future fighters as DLC, the roster will only continue to endear itself to us, so in this category, ARMS gets a perfect 10. Moving on to the stage design. Each of the 10 fighters has their own unique stage that best suits that character, and their abilities, like Ribbon Girl's stage, which has platforms that rise and sink into the ground, which is perfect for her triple jump. One thing that's been clear to me from my hours of play is that stage selection will be an important factor in any competitive play due to certain characters' mobility or lack thereof. More superficially, each stage is designed fantastically, all of them feeling unique and having their own traits which can be exploited to the benefit of the player. In this category, ARMS gets a 10. Moving on to play modes. ARM, like its brethren in the FGC, has a variety of modes to play, starting with Grand Prix, which allows a player to compete against the computers in an arcade mode style. The player must win 10 contests to become the ARMS Grand Champ. You also have the ability to raise and lower the level of the computers between level 1 and 7. Also, notice I said compete and not fight. That's because in Grand Prix, fighting isn't the only thing that takes place. You must also compete in games of skill such as V-Ball, hoops, and skill shot. This is what makes Grand Prix mode different to your traditional arcade or story mode in other fighting games. And while some of those contests are stronger than others, it's a nice way to break up the monotony of single player mode. Moving on to Versus mode, which allows up to 4 players per console and has a variety of contests in which to compete such as fight, team fight, V-Ball, hoops, skill shot, and 1-on-100. Most of these contests have customizable rules, the sole exception being 1-on-100. Versus mode allows for a large variety of fun in either solo or multiplayer. Next up is Party Match, which allows for the player to compete online in all of the available contests without the fear of a ranking system. Then you have Friends, which allows the player to create online lobbies for their matches against all of their friends. Again, you can also set up the rules and choose which contest you will compete in. The same can be said about Local, the only difference being local matches aren't online. And finally, you have ranked matches, which can only be unlocked once a player has beaten the Grand Prix at level 4, which I can assure you is no easy task. Level 4 is essentially ARMS' hard mode, and there are 7 difficulties, so you can only imagine how hard this is. Back to the ranked matches. Ranked matches are online 1 versus 1 fights where players compete for rank points. It's pretty self-explanatory. So ARMS actually has a diverse amount of different modes to compete in, each with a variety of contests to choose from, which is great. And while some of these contests aren't as good as others, it's nice that they are there. So in this category, ARMS gets a 9. Moving on to the mechanics, ARM uses the basic rock, paper, scissors most fighting games employ. Blocks beat strikes, grabs beat blocks, and strikes beat grabs. But these aren't the only mechanics one must master in order to truly become competitive at ARMS. I said earlier that each character can equip new gloves, each glove having a different speed, weight, and ability, and one must find the combination that works best for them. In actuality, it's best that the player familiarize themselves with every arm available because it allows the player to diversify and strategize. That's another factor that comes into play, strategy. By design, ARMS is a much more deliberate fighting game, and it doesn't employ the button memorization utilized in other fighting games. You simply throw and curve your punches, but this is where strategy and movement come into play. How and when will you strike, and how will you approach and dodge? In fact, the most important mechanic ARMS employs is movement, which is also the strongest mechanic in the game in my opinion. Players who master movement in ARMS will dominate, whereas players who struggle to move about freely will suffer excruciating losses. ARMS takes the tried and true rock, paper, scissors mechanic and adds weapon customization and unique movement to make for a completely sound fighting game, and it does this without the learning curve of complex button combinations. In this category, ARMS gets a 9.5. Moving on to the graphics. ARMS is beautiful, and graphically it's one of the best looking games on the Nintendo Switch, running at 1080p 60 frames per second when docked, and 720p 60 frames per second when undocked. It's very impressive, but it's not a powerhouse by any means. ARMS looks great because of its art direction, and that's not a bad thing at all. It's one of the very reasons why people gravitate to Nintendo franchises in the first place, so in this category, ARMS gets an 8. Lastly, we're going to talk about controls. This area is hit or miss. While Nintendo would have you believe motion controls is the only way to play, ARMS actually has a wide variety of control schemes to choose from. You have the Pro Controller / Joy-Con grip, which allows for traditional, non-motion based controls. You have the Split Joy-Con 2-player control scheme where each player gets a single Joy-Con, turns it on its side, and plays. Again, this control scheme also lacks motion. And finally, you have your motion controls, where a player uses a Joy-Con in each hand and must physically throw the punches and turn the Joy-Cons to curve punches. Some of these controls feel better than others, but it comes down to personal preference. Personally, I believe the best way to play is the Pro Controller. It feels the most natural to me, and at the higher levels I struggled with the motion controls and went back to the Pro Controller. But again, each individual player will find what works best for them. In this category, ARMS gets a 7.5. Now guys, it's time to get on to the final score. ARMS is a brand new Nintendo IP that is trying to shake up the FGC in a way that has never really been attempted, and it gets so much right. Endearing characters, excellent stage design, and compelling game modes, but its most important factor is how much fun the game is in both single and multiplayer. Whether you're playing with friends locally or competing online in a ranked match, you will find yourself smiling and laughing and just having a great time. And while I may have some reservations as to whether or not ARMS can be a competitive esport title, I cannot deny the sheer joy the game has brought for me, my friends, and family. It is a highlight and a must-own title for the Nintendo Switch. ARMS gets an 8.6 and our official Nintendo PowerZone seal of quality.